A story almost too shocking to believe. A mother and her boyfriend beat her 3-year-old daughter to death for interrupting their plans to have sex. And now, some believe the mother's prison sentence let her off easy. We're taking a closer look at the case of 3-year-old Kaylee-Jade Priest and the grisly crime her mother committed. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. Today's story takes us across the pond to Solihull, England, a medium-sized town in between London and Manchester. It was August 8, 2020, when 23-year-old Nicola Priest made plans with her then-boyfriend, 22-year-old Callum Redfern, to have sex. They planned to meet up at Nicola's apartment, and there's actually CCTV video of Nicola and her 3-year-old daughter, Kaylee-Jade, on the way to the apartment. When it came time for trial, prosecutors pointed out that in this video, you can see Kaylee-Jade reach for her mom's hand, and Nicola ignores her. The mother is checking out her reflection and scrolling on her phone. You can see the little girl looking up at her mom, but Nicola never looks her way. This is the last video of Kaylee-Jade before she was killed just hours later. It's not entirely known what happened after Nicola's boyfriend Callum arrived, except that the adults planned to have sex, but Kaylee-Jade wanted to stay up and play. The next day, on August 9th, Nicola called 999, England's emergency number. Prosecutors say this call was made after Kaylee-Jade was already dead. When investigators got to the scene, it was clear there had been a ferocious assault on Kaylee-Jade and that the beating was clearly intentional. In court, experts would compare Kaylee-Jade's injuries to what would happen if she fell from 30 feet high onto concrete, or if she'd been hit by a car that was traveling at 40 miles per hour. They said the night of her murder, Kaylee-Jade got sick multiple times throughout the evening as a result of this severe beating. Medical examiners determined the girl had also suffered prior injuries to this beating, including broken ribs, lower leg fractures, and a broken sternum. As the investigation continued, a pattern of abuse came to light, all at the hands of Kaylee-Jade's mother. Neighbors who lived beneath the family told investigators that when Kaylee cried, her mom would drown out the noise by turning on loud music. They also recalled a time hearing a loud bang coming from their apartment, and later heard Nicola say, "I'll just say she fell off the bed." There were also other reports that Nicola would hit Kaylee-Jade on her head, and the 3-year-old was heard crying, quote, in a fearful tone. Investigators also collected electronic evidence with some incriminating messages between Nicola and Callum. Just days before Kaylee-Jade's death, on July 24, 2020, Nicola texted him, quote, "I'm gonna kill her because she keeps leaving the living room or going in the kitchen, so I've paled her one," meaning she hit the girl. Callum replied, quote, "Good, give her one for me," and Nicola wrote back, "I will, babe." There were also messages investigators collected from Callum's phone, including one sent on July 28, 2020. He wrote to Nicola, quote, "I'm going to keep the little brat away from me. Sick of your spunking daughter." When it came time for trial, Nicola and Callum pointed the finger at each other, saying the blame was on the other defendant. Both were ultimately cleared of murder, but convicted of manslaughter. Nicola received a 15-year sentence to be served concurrently with a separate 3-year sentence. Callum was sentenced to 14 years. After the verdicts came down, Kaylee-Jade's grandmother, Debbie Windmill, released a statement. It reads, "I could never stop staring at the smile on her beautiful face. I loved every moment watching her develop to nearly school age. Preparing to buy my first grandchild her preschool uniform was something that filled me with such happiness. I couldn't wait to see her in it, but this opportunity was stolen from me in the most brutal of ways. Everybody deserves the gift of life. Kaylee-Jade deserved to show the world who she could have been and what greatness she would have brought to the world. Nanny will forever hold you in her heart." Nicola and Callum were sentenced in 2021, and since then, there's been a public outcry regarding their sentences. There are also now online petitions to amend the sentences, giving each defendant a life sentence. But is that even possible? We turn now to international attorney David Tafuri to make sense of the case.
I've never heard of a case with such, concerning facts about human behavior with respect to such a young child. In fact, impacts me a lot because My wife and I, we have a 2-year-old child. He's a great kid, but he needs a lot of attention. And I can't ever imagine, ignoring my child the way they did, and putting my own interests so far above that of the health, safety, and security of my child.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically today is because this is a case that takes place over in England, and I'm not quite as familiar with international law. So, I guess just to start, comparing and contrasting the US, which I'm more familiar with, and England, their murder trials, are they somewhat similar over there?
There's some similarity. Obviously, our system grew out of the English system, but there are also differences. And notably for this particular case, there are differences with respect to how the sentence is given. And there's a trend towards not having life sentences where it's not reviewable in England and across Europe, which is not happening and not as much of a concern here in the United States.
So, talking about sentencing, that's kind of why we're bringing up this story today, because there's kind of been a public outcry for the sentencing of such a vicious crime. Now, in the United States, we oftentimes have, if someone's convicted of murder, it's life in prison without parole. And here we're seeing sentences of 15, 14 years. Is that somewhat normal for over there?
I think it's because of that trend that I mentioned to you, which is um, based on the idea that anyone can be rehabilitated, and since it's possible for rehabilitation, that sentences should only be life sentences in the most extreme circumstances, and they should always be reviewable so that if the person has been rehabilitated, even if they have a life sentence, they have the chance to be released. But I agree with you. This is one where the facts are appalling, and uh, your heart goes out to the 3-year-old child who was killed here, and the malfeasance by the mother and the boyfriend committing these crimes, but also that they had so little reflection about what they did, and so little remorse for what they did, is what makes this stand out as maybe being unbalanced in terms of the levity of the crime versus the length of the sentences that were given to the mother and the boyfriend.
And we can't talk about this case without looking at the evidence against Nicola and Callum. If we're zeroing in on the facts of this case, as you said, so disturbing and tough to even talk about. But one of the things that really caught my attention is that prior to this little girl's murder, there was somewhat of evidence that she was being abused. We have cell phone texts, information from the mom and the boyfriend. Neighbors are saying that they've seen her be abused before. I know in the United States there's issues with prior bad acts. Is that something that could have been brought in at trial in England?
I'm not sure if that was brought in during the trial or not, and I don't know what the English law is with respect to prior bad acts and whether the rules of evidence exclude them. But does seem to be there was evidence. There were neighbors that heard loud noises, but it doesn't seem clear to me from reviewing all the articles and reporting on the case that any of that was brought to the attention of the authorities in England, unfortunately, because if it had been, maybe this could have been avoided.
So unclear about all that, but there is a text I do want to talk about because this one was kind of shocking to me. The mother had texted, "I'm going to kill her." This was a couple of days before the daughter had died. To me, that almost sounds like premeditation. Is premeditation as important over there as it is over here?
Yes, premeditation is, and I'm not, it appears to me that they didn't take that to mean premeditation, that it was, an expression of frustration and the willingness potentially to do violence to the daughter, but it didn't, I don't think that it was considered to suggest that there was a plan to kill the daughter. And of course, when someone says, "I'm going to kill her," as she did, it could be an expression, "I'm upset with her," or it could actually mean you intend to kill her. But very often, obviously, people use that in a different way. Uh, that wouldn't suggest premeditation, and there wasn't a finding of premeditation in this case, to my knowledge.
I want to talk about motive too, because that's kind of interesting in this case. It seems that the mother and the boyfriend had planned or they wanted to have sex. And it sounds like the young daughter was not tired. She didn't want to go to bed. And that's kind of what led to them killing her. How does all of that figure in? I know over here, again, I keep referring to what happens in the United States, but you don't need a motive in order to yield a conviction. Is that something that you need over there? Would motive have come in?
I think motive came in with respect to, uh, yes, because there wasn't a lot of physical evidence, and so that motive was important. We know that because the boyfriend and the mother pointed fingers at each other. So one of them told the authorities, "Yeah, we were annoyed, or my partner was annoyed at her because we wanted to have sex." Again, the callousness of that as being the basis for violent crimes against such a young child is what really makes this case stand out, and I think that played into decision making about the sentence as well. Although again, we didn't get a life sentence here, which probably in the U.S. you would expect a life sentence would have been given.
Besides being charged in Kaylee-Jade's death, Nicola was also charged with cruelty to children. I'm wondering though, how can one person be charged with this and not the other when they both partook?
I think that's based on the fact that there's more of a record of a continuous misbehavior by the mother towards the daughter and mistreatment towards the daughter. There is also this video of the mother with the daughter on that day, walking in and out of their apartment building, and the mother was completely ignoring the child, and you add that to the information that the neighbors reported about what they heard the mom saying. And those things did not involve the boyfriend, or they couldn't be proven to involve the boyfriend. And I think that's why she was convicted on that count and he was not.
Both defendants were convicted in Kaylee-Jade's death, but not her murder. I know we're comparing this a lot to the US and the UK, but that's, I mean, what I'm familiar with. And over here, to me, this seems clean cut. It would be first degree murder. I mean, some could argue differently, but it would likely be murder. What happened over there is that they were cleared of the murder charges and just convicted on manslaughter. What do you make of that?
I think that my guess is that that was a decision made because of the lack of physical evidence that could conclusively demonstrate that it was the physical hitting and violence by the mother and boyfriend that caused her to die. And I think that's why she and he got manslaughter.
So they have their sentences of 15 years, 14 years. Is it possible that they could be released before that sentence is complete?
Yes, it is. And this is an aggravating part of the situation for this particular case, given the gravity of the violence and the tragedy that happened, that we lost the life of a 3-year-old. The mother will be eligible for parole in 2030, so a mere 6 years from now, which would mean she'd serve less than her full sentence, although I don't know how much time she spent in jail between her arrest and conviction. And so you would hope that although she's eligible for parole, given the circumstances, that she will not be given parole, even if she does make some progress towards rehabilitation.
We've been talking about that a lot, the rehabilitation of life in prison, because that's kind of the goal of it overall. What would it take for the mother and the boyfriend to show that they have been rehabilitated?
It's going to take remorse. It's going to take good behavior. It's going to take demonstration that they've taken action to address their conduct. Oftentimes it can be demonstrated by good acts in prison, and it can be demonstrated by taking education classes and doing some other things that would put the person in a far different position when they are released from prison, and that would demonstrate that they will be able to immerse themselves back in society uh, and not be likely to commit violent acts in the future. So those are some aspects of what would be taken into account in that parole hearing.
And then there's the change.org petition. One of the reasons we're talking about this specific case today is because a lot of people across the world, but also in England, have been troubled by this sentence. There are petitions saying, hey, give those two life. Hearing the details of this, they deserve that much time behind bars. But does any of this matter? I mean, it's the court of public opinion rather than the court of England. So does any of that matter at all?
I think it matters for England's reputation as a country where justice can be done. It matters for England's reputation as a country that it takes crime seriously, that punishes crime, and that is taking actions to deter future criminal acts like this one. It could also certainly impact England's image around the world. It could impact tourism. So it does have an effect on England. But England is also balancing a lot of different things. It's trying to, comply with the European Court of Human Rights, with human rights law in Europe, which is a little bit differently, especially when it comes to which is a little bit different, especially when it comes to criminal justice from the United States. So those are all things that are dynamics in this situation.
Both Nicola Priest and Callum Redfern will be eligible for parole in less than 10 years. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.